The Irish government just signed up to an EU deal which will leave every Irish man, woman and child paying over €3,200 to Brussels. By comparison, French citizens will only have to pay €780 each. In other words, Irish citizens will be paying over 4 times as much as the French, despite France being a much larger country than we are. With this raw deal in mind, it begs the question, is there an argument for doing what Britain did and leaving the European Union? This is Ben Scallan and you're watching Gript Media. In our last video, we highlighted the Europhilia of Irish leaders and how they are totally ideologically committed to Brussels and the European Union, even at the expense of our own country. Here's a quick flashback to refresh all of our memories.
Let there be no doubt about where Ireland stands. We want nothing to do with a backward-looking idea of sovereignty. We remain absolutely committed to the ideals of the European Union.
I'd certainly like to see us further integrate Europe. I'd probably be a federalist on European issues.
Varadkar and Martin obviously believe that the EU is God's gift to Ireland. They tell us about all the wonderful benefits of membership and the supposed economic advantages that we get out of it. But it seems like nobody ever stops to examine whether or not this is actually the case. First of all, let's look at the economics. Since 2013, Ireland has been a net contributor to the EU budget. For the past 7 years, we've given Brussels billions of euros more than we get back annually. Not only that, but the amount we give them has been rising steadily over the years, especially since Brexit, as the EU Commission scrambles to fill a Britain-sized hole in their budget. Britain has left the Union, so naturally countries like Ireland have to pay even more to fill the gap left behind. What this means is that when we talk about things like cap payments for farmers and other subsidies, we're really talking about Irish money that's coming back to us with strings attached after Brussels has skimmed a few $100 million off the top. For example, in 2018, Ireland gave the EU €2.3 billion and received back €2 billion. Does that seem fair to anybody watching this video? If I said, give me a tenner and I'll give you back a fiver, but I'll decide what you can spend it on, would you consider that to be a good or a bad deal? Well, I think we all know the answer to that question. Whatever about the past, at this point in 2020, they aren't giving us anything that we don't already have ourselves. All they're doing is taking with both hands. Now, at this point, some will inevitably say, but Ben, in total, the EU has given us far more than we've ever given them over the years, especially for things like the roads. In fact, according to the EU Commission website, they've given us €40 billion net since we joined in 1973. That's 40 billion over 47 years, which definitely sounds like a lot. That's obviously nothing to scoff at. But that only adds up if you conveniently ignore certain parts of the story, like, for example, the Troika-imposed bank bailout. The bailout left Ireland saddled with €64 billion of German and French bank debt, courtesy of the EU Commission and the Fianna Fáil government. In other words, €40 billion may have come in over the years, but that pales in comparison to the €64 billion that is still going out as we speak in the form of guaranteeing the bank debt of foreign bondholders, including those from the bigger EU countries like France and Germany. And that's not even including the interest on that debt, which is substantial. So badly was Ireland screwed during the bailout, in fact, that a chief advisor to José Manuel Barroso, the former EU Commission president, said that Ireland was bullied by the EU into signing that agreement. As the name implies, the European banking crisis was just that, a European crisis. All the member states were involved, not just Ireland, and yet this tiny island ended up paying 42% of the total cost of the crisis. According to SIP2 researcher Michael Taft, the Irish economy around the time made up a tiny 1.2% of the EU's total GDP, and yet we paid 42% of the bailout for the whole union. That is simply staggering. Again, according to Taft, the bailout cost every man, woman and child in Ireland nearly €9,000 each. Meanwhile, the average for other EU countries was €192 per capita. So you pay a whopping €9,000, while most other citizens only pay a couple of hundred. It is possibly one of the greatest economic stitch-ups in history and completely wiped away any financial benefits that the EU might have given us in the past. We're still very much feeling the consequences of that today, and we'll be lucky if we can pay it back within this century. And now, as we covered in our previous video, Ireland will be net contributors to the EU's coronavirus bailout fund, paying for the repair of other member states and getting literally nothing back that we didn't already have. At the same time, our contributions are being dramatically increased over the next 7 years. Between all of this and having our fishing waters pillaged to the tune of billions, this arrangement with Europe is starting to look worse and worse by the year. And that's not even taking into account the neutrality issue. Many Irish people agree that military neutrality is a very important part of our national character and identity. Arguably one of the biggest sources of conflict between Ireland and Britain historically was over things like conscription and foreign wars. Even today, the truth is, as a small country, we really can't afford to be dragged into foreign conflicts that we have no business being a part of. The deal is, we mind our own business and everyone else leaves us alone. It's a pretty good arrangement and it's worked out reasonably well for us so far. And yet we have powerful players on the continent like German Chancellor Angela Merkel and French President Emmanuel Macron calling for a real, true European army. Similarly, Bruno Le Maire, the French Minister for Finance, has called for a European empire. These are their words, not mine. This info is all freely available if you find it hard to believe. Already, Irish troops are serving in EU battle groups, which many people aren't aware of in this country. Gradually, the neutrality and military autonomy that we prize so much in Ireland is being eroded right under our collective noses. Perhaps even more alarmingly than that, we have figures like Guy Verhofstadt making seriously concerning statements about European imperialism. You might recognise Verhofstadt primarily because he was the head Brexit coordinator for the EU. He was also the Belgian Prime Minister and the head of the ALDE group in the European Parliament. He is by no means an unimportant or insignificant man. His voice carries a large amount of influence and weight in Brussels. So with that in mind, have a listen to what Verhofstadt had to say about the future of the EU as he sees it.
We cannot continue, dear friends, with a Europe that is always acting too little and too late. In the world order of tomorrow, the world order of tomorrow is not a world order based on nation states or countries. It's a world order that is based on empires. China is not a nation. It's a civilization, Han. Then finally the Russian Federation. The world of tomorrow is a world of empires in which we European and you British can only defend your interest, your way of life by doing it together in a European framework and in the European Union.
A European empire. There it is in plain English for all to see. None of this is hidden or secret information. They're telling you openly what their goals are. While agreements like PESCO claim to just be about defence cooperation, that veneer is paper thin to anyone who actually listens to EU officials talk openly about their plans. Even democratic principles seem to fall by the wayside when it comes to the EU. For context, in European politics, unanimity means that all EU countries at the Council have to agree on a proposal before it can be adopted. Here's what Guy Verhofstadt had to say about that in 2011.
And that is the real problem, colleagues. Why there is such a problem in this crisis? Because member states are reluctant to transfer new sovereignty and powers to the European Union. And we all know that the only way out of this crisis is a new transfer of powers to the European Union and to the European institutions.
As it stands, the EU is completely resistant to reform. With almost 500 million citizens across its member states, Ireland makes up only 1% of the total EU population. We elect 13 MEPs out of a total parliament of 705. In other words, we are a drop in the democratic bucket. Our entire country could become Eurocritical overnight, and it would mean absolutely nothing to the powers that be. But it's actually even worse than that, because the European Parliament, as in the guys that we actually vote for, can't even propose legislation. All they can do is vote for or against legislation that's proposed by the European Commission, a commission which is completely unelected. How many people walking around in society today could name 3 current EU commissioners off the top of their head? Nobody even knows who these people are, and yet they propose legislation that affects our lives every single day. What this means in real terms is, even if we sent all the right people to Europe, all we'd be able to do is vote down one piece of bad legislation after another. We'd never be able to implement changes that we wanted or reverse the damage that's already been done. We'd constantly be on the back foot, which is, of course, exactly how the system was designed. From the beginning, it was set up to be resistant to change and reform. The whole thing is fundamentally anti-democratic from top to bottom. Why do you think they forced us to vote again on the Nice and Lisbon Treaty when we voted no to both of them the first time? After all, it was revealed that the EU's plan to make Ireland vote yes to the defeated Lisbon Treaty was entitled The Solution to the Irish Problem. Call me crazy, but I think some might call that a lack of respect for the will of the electorate. Could it be because the EU has nothing to do with the people or democracy and is instead all about control? After all, it was revealed in 2011 that the Irish national budget was seen in the German Bundestag before it was even put to the doll. In other words, we had a foreign government checking over our shoulder and accessing our private documents, like a teacher checking their students' homework. All of this raises serious questions about how committed Ireland should be to this union. And this might not be as much of a terrifying thought as you might think. Though doomsayers predicted utter catastrophe for Britain if they ever left the EU, like the IMF's claim that Brexit would trigger a UK recession, the reality panned out very differently as we now know. In January of this year, before the world economy was sideswiped by COVID-19, the same IMF that was predicting disaster for Britain before the referendum was finally forced to admit that the UK was on track for steady economic growth. In other words, the apocalyptic scaremongering from the Remain campaign turned out to be completely 180 degrees wrong, as many had predicted. It makes you wonder if what they tell us about Ireland's dependence on our European masters is just as false. After all, there are countless examples of small countries that aren't in the EU and yet trade with Europe and have perfectly normal standards of living, sometimes even better than our own. For example, Norway, with a population of 5.4 million, isn't in the European Union. Does Norway seem like a deprived or underdeveloped country to you? Switzerland, with 8 million, isn't in the EU, and yet they are home to the richest city in Europe, namely Zurich. Does Switzerland need the European Union? Even outside of Europe, there are small independent countries like Singapore with only 5.6 million people which thrive economically. Take New Zealand as a good example. New Zealand has almost the exact same population as the Republic of Ireland to the decimal place. We have 4.9 million people, they have 4.8. We're both small island nations. We both rely heavily on tourism and pull in billions annually from foreign visitors. New Zealand makes almost 6 billion euros a year from overseas tourism, while Ireland makes about 7 billion. We both have large agricultural sectors and many similar exports. The only difference is Ireland is in the EU being dictated to by Brussels and New Zealand is not. And remember, this is the same New Zealand which was being celebrated by the Irish media for their handling of the COVID-19 crisis. In fact, the World Bank ranked them #1 easiest country to do business in the entire world for 2020. If New Zealand can do it, why can't Ireland? What's our excuse? They're a successful, attractive first world country and do absolutely fine without any European commissioners looking over their shoulder. Now, in conclusion, I'm sure there are going to be people who try to make this a left and right issue politically. These days, anybody who dissents from the mainstream is automatically smacked with the label of far right by some, and that category includes anyone who criticises the European Union. So here is a clip from 2016 of Richard Boyd Barrett, the leader of People Before Profit, talking about many similar things to what we've discussed here. Bear in mind, People Before Profit are literally as far left as you can possibly get. They speak at an annual Marxism conference and are self-avowed Trotskyites. Take a listen to what Boyd Barrett had to say about the EU.
Was there any acknowledgement that these people were behind and financing the hugely resourced Remain campaign? And what is their agenda? Is their agenda the interests of the millions across Europe? For a better life for them? To protect refugees, to build the social Europe that Deputy Howlin says he wants? No, I think you must have a case of a bad amnesia or thorough dishonesty if you think that's why those people were resourcing the Remain campaign. These were the same people who inflicted absolutely cruel and brutal austerity on the people of Greece, of Portugal, of Spain and of this country, who insisted that millions of working people and the poor and the least well-off and the most vulnerable bore the brunt of the wild gambling and greed and speculation of Europe's super-rich. These were the people who resourced the Remain campaign in Britain, and they did so precisely to preserve their interests, to ensure that the European Union continues with policies that protects the 1% of the super wealthy and the financial and corporate elite at the expense of millions of ordinary people across Europe. That is the truth. And of course, that is the key reason why there has been a revolt against the EU and its policies that is not uniquely British, but that we have seen with massive mobilisations in Greece, in Spain, in Portugal, in Italy, in this country, against the cruel austerity policies that the European Union has imposed on them. And a European Union that has shown an utter contempt for democracy. Again, manifested today as we speak, with the European Commission, an unelected body, saying that they don't care what democratic mandate this House has or what democratic decision was made by the Irish people in the last election on the issue of water charges. We are simply, they say, not allowed to get rid of water charges. Is this the democratic and social Europe that Deputy Howlin is talking about? He must be joking.
I always try to be fair and give credit where credit is due. Boyd Barrett is absolutely correct on this issue. I hardly disagree with a word he said. And so my point is this: the issue of Europe is not about left and right, it's about up and down. It's about whether we want to be ruled by unelected foreign elites who seek only to line their own pockets at the expense of the people, or do we want leaders who are accountable to Irish voters and to the democratic process? That's up to you to decide. But until then, please like and share this video, and if you enjoyed it, please consider signing up for a monthly donation via the link on screen to help us produce more content like this. Alternative media like Gript needs all the assistance it can get, and every donation goes a long way. As always, thanks for watching.